My name is Chucky Campbell. Behind you, you'll meet my band later, The Faction. Are we good with this? I'm here to talk to you about language and social identity, bond and barrier. I'm an English professor. I'm a publisher. I'm a writer. I'm a poet. And I want to talk to you about the way language frames our social realities and what that means for us in terms of consequences in our daily lives. So we're going to talk about how language can be both our bond and our barrier. In order to do that, I need to introduce a concept to you. And the first concept is denotation. All right, this is one way that we use language. You're probably pretty familiar with it. If you've ever used a dictionary, right, you open it up and you see words, this is what you're looking at. You're looking at the literal definition of a word, right? And some of these words, right, they're new, right? And so you have to wonder about what denotation is doing for us. Roughly, denotation is the static meaning of the way that we use language. It pins things down so that we can make sense of them, right? So if you're looking at a plot of land, right, and you're using a map to single out one point, right, this is roughly what denotation does for language, right? It allows us a static, fixed way of understanding meaning and what meaning does in our lives, right? But language gets a lot more interesting when we think about connotation, all right? Connotation is the positive and negative associations that words naturally carry with them, okay? And it gets a lot more interesting when we start thinking about the way this doubles and triples meaning and what it means for us in our daily lives as we move about and navigate reality, okay? So if we were to look at something, let's say a rose, right? A rose wouldn't be just a kind of flower, right? Instead, a rose would mean a number of different things, right? Denotation tells us that a rose is a kind of flower, all right, or something resembling a flower. However, connotation tells us that a rose might mean love, or it could mean honor, or faith, or beauty, or balance, devotion, even passion, or maybe even intrigue, right? And therein lies what we're talking about, how meaning is being made and how language is allowed to evolve over time, right? And without connotation, this would be very hard for language to evolve, right? And change the way that we look at the world and the way we see the world, right? So if we're thinking of, let's say, the word bling bling, right? Obviously, this word did not come into our lexicon in the 16th century, right? This came in later on, and it gets added on. And this happens through connotation and the way that we bring the associative properties of language into the words that we speak, into description and redescription in the world that we live in. So I want to give you a puzzle in language today, but I need your help because I can't do it by myself, okay? What we have here is the color green, right? And we're going to do a little bit of practice with connotation. I need you to tell me what are some of the first things that come to mind when you see this word. Go ahead. Trees. Go ahead. Broccoli. Envy. Money. It's all right? You got anything else? Oh, he took yours, right? Okay, some of the common answers that we find are money, right? All right, give a round of applause for that. Okay, luck. Envy, right? Very good. Grass, trees, environment, go, and fresh, right? So as you can see, what I'm trying to show you is that even with something as simple as the color green, right, what language is doing is creating a frame for us to see that color, for us to interpret it and make sense of it, right? So it begins a new window for us to see our social reality for which we live, right? But the problem occurs when we start to see language only as disconnected. So if you see the color green here and you see these words as only separate words, they don't really mean that much, right? Putting fresh beside of luck or luck beside of go, right? That's confusing, right? It doesn't really seem like something that's making a lot of sense to us. However, if we choose to see these words not as things that are disconnected, but as things that are interconnected, that build relationships with one another, then we start to have a whole new mode and model for creativity, right? We are able to innovate and come up with new ideas, right? So something as simple as money and environment in and of itself doesn't mean very much. But if you think about the relationship between money and environment, you might be able to build an entire platform to come up with a new idea, such as the economic implications of going green, right, in our current socio-political climate, right? And if we see these things as terms of relationships, and we're able to bring these things together, then language can become our bond. it can become a way of allowing us to see new innovative ways and pathways to understand the world in which we live in. However, language surrounds us. It's everywhere. When we walk outside, it's painted on the streets. It's on some of our t-shirts right now, right? Some people, they tattoo it on their bodies. They ornament themselves with jewelry, right? And language surrounds us. And so we kind of turn our minds off to it. And we let the language do its own work. And there's a problem with that because we're kind of become desensitized to what language is doing in our lives and the way it's doing the work that it's doing, right? So there's a kind of complexity that happens when we turn our minds off, right? We fail to see that math is the language of science, that DNA is the language of life, right? That the language arts in and of themselves are transcendent quality that interconnect fields and disciplines and allow us to connect ideas and push forward, right? And so right now what I need your help in doing as well is I want to give you another puzzle in language, and I want us to think about what happens when these ideas conflict and contradict one another, right? Are we going to allow them to contradict one another and conflict and hold us back to become our barrier, or are we going to be able to allow those contradictions to lift our ideas up and allow us to transcend the differences between things, the separations? So a person living in society, they might come across this message of just say no with dare, right? But they also might come into this conflicting message of just do it, right? Which one are you going to follow, right? These are obviously two opposites that are bumping heads against one another, okay? So when we run into these puzzles in language, how do we make sense of them and how do we negotiate them? How do we navigate that process, right? So I got a little puzzle in language right here. We have green stop sign, right? And this might appear to you quite puzzling, right? Stop signs are normally what? Red, right? And therein lies an issue and a problem, right? But do stop signs have to be red? Or are we conditioned to think that stop signs must be red, right? Does red always mean stop? No, right? We go into the restroom to wash our hands, right? Red might mean hot, right? And so there's multiple meanings going on here. On one side, right, when we look at green, right, it could mean a ton of things, right? Money, luck, envy, grass, trees, as we saw before. But a stop sign, in terms of definition, creates this contradiction and pushes us away from understanding the true meaning of what's happening. Now, what's happening here is we are taught at a very early age that red means stop and green means go, right? And that's useful in so much as a social rule to keep us from running into each other at a traffic light, right? Or, so that we don't get into car accidents, right? But the problem comes when we fail to think about why these social rules are there, right? If you've ever ran up on a stoplight in the middle of the night when you're a little bit tired and there was no one in the intersection and you were sitting there waiting for the light to turn, right? You might have realized for a moment, I'm waiting for no reason. Anybody done that? Right? You look to the right, you look to the left. Who are you looking for? The cop, right? You're looking to make sure, right, this rule does not end up, getting me a ticket, right? So this works insofar as we are understanding the idea or the conceptualization of a stop sign. But we should also realize that when we are met with these contradictions, that they can allow us to understand these ideas in a new way. This is what the Greeks called doxa. These are unstated, taken for granted assumptions or common sense behind the distinctions that we make, right? Pierre Bourdieu, who is a sociologist, says that doxa happens when we forget the limits that have given rise to unequal divisions in society. It's an adherence to the relations of order, which because the structure inseparably both the real world and the thought world are accepted as self-evident, right? It's when we turn off our ideas or our ability to think, right, and just accept the social rule without questioning it, right? And then we have a problem with obeying authorities that are not necessarily there for the good of what we're trying to do. So here's another color that I want to test you guys with a little bit, okay? So when I show you the color black right here, what are some of the things that you think? Go ahead. Soil. Evil. What else? Back here. Night. Beautiful, absolutely, okay? And that's important because we're looking at this. Can I get one more? Cold, okay. Some of the most common answers are death, gothic, tragic, grief, funeral, wicked, darkness, and evil, right? And if you can see the way this color is being framed, it's not necessarily in a positive light, okay? And there's some issues with that. So I want to give you another puzzle in language, right? Let's look maybe at a black wedding dress, right? Who's heard of that before? All right, there's a couple right out here. But is a black wedding dress usually the norm? No, absolutely not, right? Because when we look at black, it has this kind of frame of being death and tragic and wicked and being in relationship with all of these other connotations. And a wedding dress worn in America, in our cultural construct, is typically long and white, right? This kind of traditional construct tells us that we're wearing the white wedding dress for faith or maybe even for tradition, right? Well, not all our wedding dresses are white. Some are cream-colored, right? Okay? Depending on the situation. But when I was teaching English as a second language in China, I found something else out about wedding dresses. In China, wedding dresses are traditionally red, right? Which kind of illuminates the social construct that wedding dresses don't have to be white, or they don't have to be black, or they don't have to be any color, right? That this is the way that we're framing reality and looking reality, and it's a way that we are conditioned. Further, what if we're not talking about stop signs or wedding dresses anymore? Let's up the ante, right? It's easy when we're talking about wedding dresses, right? But what if we're not talking about that stuff at all? What if we're looking at not wedding dresses or stop signs, but people, right? And obviously what I've done here is I've taken the wedding dress out and I've inserted the black male, right? Now, you take the ideas and the frame of death, tragic, wicked, gothic, evil, funeral, elegance, and you have a problem here, right? And then we apply it to the male. The male is a person, plant, animal, etc., right? And when we're looking at this, we see a whole problematic issue start to reveal itself, right? So if we look at the black male, and I'm going to ask the audience, are there any stereotypes that you might be able to give me? Go ahead. Thug, right? Drugs. Violent. Prison, okay? And so, you guys are telling me, you know this already, right? You're framing the situation for me by describing and re-describing what the black male represents, right? And you notice I've paired this with Trayvon Martin's picture purposely, right? Some of the most common answers are drug dealers, violent, thugs, perpetrators of crime, promiscuous, undependable, uneducated, right? And when you look at this, angry, okay? Now, some of you guys read my mind, right? How did I know you were going to say what you were going to say, right? It's because these modes of describing and re-describing the black male in our society are a definite problem, right? When we're describing the black male in this way, right, we're kind of using this frame to tell the black male who he is or who he's expected to be. And if you're a black male in society, you have a couple of choices. You can say, I choose not to be uneducated. I choose not to be undependable. I choose not to be violent. I choose not to be a thug. I don't want to be those things. Or, with less friction, you know what you can do? You can say, I'm going to be everything that you expect me to be. I'm going to be a perpetrator of crime. I'm going to be a drug dealer. I'm going to be uneducated because it's easier for me to follow that path. But even more what I'm interested in is not really those two choices. It's the third choice. It's that if you're a black male in our society, you don't choose who brings this frame to you. You just have to deal with it. So, going forward, some of the statistics that might back up what I'm trying to say here. Black males make up 12 to 13% of the population in this country, but comprise 80% of the prison population. If you think there's no relationship between that frame and those stereotypes, I'll have to disagree with you. 1 in 3 black males expect to go to prison in their lifetime. They can expect that by the stats, by the numbers. If you couple those numbers with the recent explosion dealing with racism without races, which suggests that our notions about race have evolved, but our language to describe it hasn't, right? It illuminates a whole other problem. Because people don't have to be racist in their heart. They don't have to be racist in their minds anymore. If you live within systemic racism, if you live in institutions that are racist, you can act within those institutions and not know you're being racist yourself. Okay? So going forward, I kind of want to look also at one example as well. Because I have paired with Trayvon Martin a little bit. I want to maybe think about the scenario that George Zimmerman was going through in his head. Now, who in here's heard of Trayvon Martin? Just so you guys know. Okay, awesome. A lot of hands in here, right? And so George Zimmerman, obviously, was told not to follow Trayvon Martin that day. Said, do not continue to follow this young man. Now, why does George Zimmerman follow Trayvon Martin? He doesn't really know Trayvon, right? Go ahead. Because of the stereotypes, right? Because it's a mode of thinking, right? And thought precedes behavior. He doesn't know Trayvon Martin by the content of his character. What he knows about Trayvon Martin is everything you guys told me today about the black male. And he doesn't have to be any different than any of us in this room. I don't know if George Zimmerman's racist. I don't know if he's a bigot. Maybe he is. I can never tell you. But what I can tell you is that if we want to stop gender discrimination in this country, if we want to stop discrimination of sexual orientation, if we want to stop racism, you can't put a Band-Aid on these problems. You have to start dealing with them. And it starts at the thought level. You have to learn to reframe and redescribe what these things mean to us. This is a famous painting by Rene Magritte called The Treachery of Images. Magritte's caption below it says, "This is not a pipe." Okay? Now, there's a lot of reasons this is not a pipe. Okay? We can't put tobacco in this and smoke it, right? It's obviously a picture, right? It's a picture of a pipe. It's a picture of a painting of a pipe. It's a picture of a painting of a projection of a pipe. And where I'm going with this is that when we symbolically look at objects, the word for the object is not the thing. Okay? And it can be easily mistaken. That's the same mistake that Trayvon Martin lost his life for. Because to George Zimmerman, Trayvon Martin was a symbol. He was a sign. He was a form of fragmented piece of language. He was not a human being. And if George Zimmerman had treated that situation as if he was a human being, Trayvon Martin might be alive today.